The letter fell from Eliza O'Sullivan's trembling hands as she stared out across the vast, dusty plains of Wyoming Territory in 1879. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston for nothing. The teaching position she'd been promised was already filled, leaving her stranded in this unforgiving frontier town with dwindling funds and even fewer prospects. "Miss, you dropped this." A small voice piped up from beside her. Eliza turned to find a boy of about 10 years, holding her crumpled rejection letter. His clothes were dusty but well kept, his dark hair tousled by the prairie wind. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the letter with a forced smile. "What's your name?" "Thomas Dawson, madam," he answered, shifting from one foot to the other. "My pa owns the Broken Spur Ranch outside town." As the boy spoke, Eliza noticed something in his hesitant manner. "Can you read what this says, Thomas?" The boy's cheeks flushed red. "No, madam, I am not much good with letters." In that moment, as the western sun bathed the little town of Clearwater in golden light, Eliza saw a possibility unfold before her. Perhaps her journey hadn't been in vain after all. "I could help you with that if you'd like," she offered. "I'm a teacher, or at least, I was meant to be." Thomas's eyes lit up, but quickly clouded with doubt. "I'd have to ask my pa first." "Of course," Eliza nodded, smoothing her travel-worn dress. "And where might I find your father?" "He'll be at the Mercantile before heading back to the ranch." Thomas pointed down the dusty main street. "You can't miss him. He's the tallest man in the county, and he's got a scar right here." The boy traced a line from the corner of his right eye down his cheek. With nothing to lose, Eliza gathered her courage and her carpetbag. She hadn't come all this way to surrender to the first setback. The Mercantile was bustling with afternoon trade when Eliza entered, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. Several heads turned to appraise the newcomer, but her attention was immediately drawn to a man at the counter, unmistakably Thomas's description: tall, broad-shouldered, with a jagged scar down his right cheek. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable back east, and his tanned skin spoke of long days under the open sky. As if sensing her gaze, he turned, revealing eyes as blue as a mountain lake. Something passed between them in that brief moment, a recognition, though they'd never met before. Thomas darted past her. "Pa! Pa! This lady's a teacher, and she said she could help me with my letters." The tall man's expression shifted from surprise to something more guarded as he assessed Eliza. "Is that so?" His voice was deep, with the rough edges of someone who spoke more to cattle than people. Eliza stepped forward, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Eliza O'Sullivan, Mr. Dawson. I've just arrived from Boston, and I find myself unexpectedly without employment. Your son mentioned he might benefit from some instruction." Isaac Dawson studied her hand for a moment before taking it in his much larger one. "Isaac Dawson. And what brings a Boston schoolteacher all the way to Wyoming Territory?" "A teaching position that apparently doesn't exist anymore," she answered honestly. "The school board decided a male teacher would be more suitable for the frontier environment." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, perhaps recognition of the injustice. "And now you're stranded." "I have sufficient funds for a return journey, but—" Eliza glanced at Thomas, who was watching them with undisguised hope. "I'd rather not admit defeat quite so easily." Isaac seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, "Thomas's mother taught him until she passed 3 years back. I've done what I can, but—" He looked down at his calloused hands. "These are better with a rope than a pen." "I understand," Eliza said softly. "I would be happy to help. We live a fair distance from town. Not exactly proper for a single lady to—" "Pa?" Thomas interrupted, tugging at his father's sleeve. "Miss Harriet's leaving on tomorrow's stage. Maybe Miss O'Sullivan could have her room?" Isaac glanced toward the back of the store where an older woman was helping a customer. "Miss Harriet runs the boarding house," he explained. If she's leaving, I suppose. He sighed, looking back at Eliza. Would $3 a week for 3 lessons be agreeable? Plus room and board at the widow Parker's place in town. She takes in boarders. It wasn't the position she'd hoped for, but it was something. That would be most generous, Mr. Dawson. Isaac, he corrected, then seemed surprised at himself for doing so. We'll be in town on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Thomas can meet you at the widow's place after I finish my business. I look forward to it, Eliza replied, relief washing over her. As they were leaving the mercantile, Eliza heard Isaac murmuring to Thomas, not realizing she could still hear them. Her voice sounds kind, Thomas. Don't let her go until I've sorted things with Mrs. Parker. That night, settled in the modest but clean room at Mrs. Parker's boarding house, Eliza wrote in her journal by lamplight. She'd come west seeking adventure and purpose after years of caring for her ailing father. Now she'd found at least a temporary place in this rugged landscape, and perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it to herself, something more in the blue eyes of a scarred rancher. The first lesson with Thomas revealed both his quick mind and his frustration with the written word. The letters seemed to jumble before his eyes, he explained, making it difficult to distinguish one from another. My ma used to say I just see things different, he said, shoulders slumping after struggling through a simple passage. Your mother was right, Eliza replied gently. Many bright minds perceive letters differently. We just need to find the approach that works for you. By their third lesson, Eliza had discovered that Thomas learned better when tracing letters in sand or forming them with small sticks. His progress was slow but steady, and his enthusiasm never waned. Isaac usually kept his distance during the lessons, attending to business around town, but he always arrived precisely when the hour was up, listening as Thomas excitedly reported what he'd learned. On the second Friday, as Thomas practiced outside with a stick and a patch of dirt, Isaac lingered in Mrs. Parker's parlor. He hasn't been this excited about learning since his mother was alive, he said quietly. You have a gift, Miss O'Sullivan. Please, call me Eliza, she replied, feeling a flush creep up her neck. And Thomas is a bright boy. He just needs someone to understand how his mind works. Isaac nodded, his gaze drifting to the window where Thomas was carefully forming letters. Rachel, his mother, she always said he was special. I worried when she passed that I wouldn't be able to give him what he needed. You've raised a wonderful son, Isaac. That's evident in everything he does. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the distance between their worlds seemed to narrow. Then Mrs. Parker bustled in with tea, breaking the spell. As July turned to August, Eliza settled into a routine in Clearwater. Beyond her lessons with Thomas, she'd taken on 3 other students from town families, providing her with a modest but steady income. She wrote long letters to her sister back in Boston, describing the vast skies and the surprising beauty of the plains. What she didn't write about was the way her heart quickened whenever Isaac Dawson's tall figure appeared in town, or how she found herself watching the road on days when they weren't scheduled for lessons. One Wednesday in mid-August, Thomas arrived for his lesson alone, clutching a folded piece of paper. Pa had to check on the north pasture, he explained, handing her the note. But he wrote this for you. Eliza unfolded the paper, touched to see the careful, block-like handwriting clearly the work of someone who, like his son, didn't find writing to come naturally. Miss O'Sullivan, would you and Thomas join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this Friday evening? I'd like to discuss his progress. Isaac Dawson. Well, Eliza said, trying to sound matter-of-fact despite the flutter in her chest, we should send your father a reply, shouldn't we? This will be excellent practice for your writing. Thomas's response was painstakingly crafted but proudly delivered. We accept with pleasure. Friday evening found Eliza dressed in her best gown, a deep blue that her sister had insisted she pack, just in case. Mrs. Parker had helped arrange her hair, commenting with a knowing smile that Isaac Dawson was a fine man, if a bit rough around the edges. The hotel restaurant was the most elegant establishment in Clearwater, which wasn't saying much by Boston standards, but the tablecloths were clean and the silverware polished. Isaac and Thomas were already waiting when she arrived, both looking somewhat uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Isaac stood as she approached, his eyes widening slightly. "Miss O'Sullivan, Eliza, you look—" He cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming." Thomas was less reserved. "You look real pretty, Miss Eliza, doesn't she, Pa?" "She certainly does," Isaac agreed, pulling out her chair with a grace that belied his frontier upbringing. The dinner conversation flowed more easily than Eliza had expected. Thomas eagerly demonstrated his improving reading skills with the menu, while Isaac spoke of the ranch and his hopes for expanding his herd of cattle. "The Broken Spur was just a run-down cabin and 50 head of cattle when I arrived from Texas 10 years ago," he explained. "Rachel and I built it together. Now I've got over 500 head and 3 hired hands." "That's quite an accomplishment," Eliza said sincerely. "It's a good life," Isaac replied, his gaze steady. "Hard sometimes, but good." As they finished their apple pie, Isaac cleared his throat. "Thomas, why don't you go ask Mr. Peterson at the front desk for one of those peppermint sticks he keeps for children?" Once Thomas was out of earshot, Isaac leaned forward. "I have a proposition for you, Eliza. The ranch house has a small room that Rachel used as a schoolroom. It's been sitting empty since she passed. I was thinking, would you consider coming to live at the ranch? As Thomas's full-time teacher?" Eliza blinked in surprise. "Live at your ranch?" "Mrs. Carver, our cook, is a respectable widow who lives in the house as well. There would be no impropriety," he added hastily. "And you'd have your own quarters, of course. I could offer $10 a week, plus room and board." It was a generous offer, far more than she was making now. But something in her expression must have revealed her hesitation. "You don't have to answer now," Isaac said quickly. "Just think about it. Thomas needs more consistent schooling, and winter's coming. The roads can get impassable, and we might not make it to town for weeks at a time." "I'll consider it carefully," Eliza promised, her mind already racing through the implications. Living under the same roof as Isaac Dawson would be complicated. She'd grown increasingly aware of her feelings for him, feelings that went far beyond the appropriate relationship between a teacher and her student's father. Thomas returned with his peppermint stick, and the moment passed. But as Isaac escorted them back to Mrs. Parker's house, his hand occasionally brushing against hers in the darkness, Eliza knew her decision would not be an easy one. The next morning, a commotion in the street drew Eliza to her window. A stagecoach had arrived, and among the disembarking passengers was a striking woman in an elegant traveling suit. Even from a distance, Eliza could see she was beautiful, with auburn hair piled fashionably atop her head. At breakfast, Mrs. Parker was bubbling with gossip. "That's Victoria Blackburn, from back east somewhere. Word is she's Isaac Dawson's sister-in-law, his late wife's sister. Hasn't been out this way since the funeral, from what I hear." Eliza's tea suddenly tasted bitter. "I see. Is she staying long?" "Couldn't say," Mrs. Parker replied, buttering her toast. "But she's taken a room at the hotel, not just for a night or two." All day, Eliza wrestled with a nagging sense of unease. Why would Rachel Dawson's sister appear now after 3 years? And why hadn't Isaac mentioned her impending arrival? She got her answer the following Monday when Thomas arrived for his lesson, practically bursting with news. "Aunt Victoria's staying with us for a while. She brought me books from New York City and a real telescope for looking at stars." His excitement was infectious, but his next word sent a chill through Eliza. "She says she might stay for good, to help Pa raise me proper, like Ma would have wanted." "That's wonderful," Eliza managed, forcing a smile. "Family is important." Pa says I should still come for my lessons, though, Thomas added. He says you're the best teacher I could have. Later that afternoon, as Thomas practiced his multiplication tables, the parlor door opened to reveal Isaac, and beside him, the auburn-haired woman Eliza had glimpsed from her window. Miss O'Sullivan, Isaac said formally, I'd like to introduce Victoria Blackburn, Rachel's sister. Victoria, this is Miss Eliza O'Sullivan, Thomas's teacher. Victoria's smile was polite but assessing. How lovely to meet you, Miss O'Sullivan. Thomas has spoken highly of you. The pleasure is mine, Miss Blackburn, Eliza replied, matching her tone. Your nephew is a delight to teach. The two women studied each other with the careful neutrality of chess players evaluating an opening move. Miss Blackburn arrived unexpectedly, Isaac explained, looking somewhat uncomfortable. She's considering a permanent relocation from New York. How fortunate for Thomas to have family nearby, Eliza said, wondering if her voice sounded as strained to others as it did to her own ears. Victoria linked her arm through Isaac's with casual familiarity. Family is everything, isn't it? Especially for a boy without a mother. And for a widower trying to manage alone. Her emphasis on the word widower was subtle but unmistakable. As they left, Isaac glanced back at Eliza with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Apology? Confusion? Whatever his thoughts, they were quickly obscured as Victoria drew his attention back to herself with a well-timed question. That night, Eliza stared at the ceiling of her modest room, trying to make sense of the day's events. It was clear that Victoria Blackburn saw herself as more than just Thomas's aunt. The way she had looked at Isaac, touched his arm, these were not the actions of a sister-in-law, but of a woman with intentions. And why shouldn't she have such intentions? Victoria was beautiful, cultured, and shared a connection to Isaac's past that Eliza could never match. More importantly, she was Rachel's sister, already family, in a way that would make a transition seamless for Thomas. By contrast, what was Eliza? A stranded schoolteacher with no claim on either of them, despite the growing affection she felt for both father and son. The next morning brought a letter delivered by one of the ranch hands, not from Isaac, but from Victoria. Dear Miss O'Sullivan, it read in flowing script. I'm hosting a small dinner party at the ranch this Saturday to become better acquainted with Isaac's friends and neighbors. I do hope you'll join us. Thomas insists his favorite teacher must be present. Victoria Blackburn. Eliza's first instinct was to decline. The thought of watching Victoria play hostess in the home that should have been Rachel's might someday be Victoria's made her stomach knot. But refusing would only hurt Thomas, and possibly reveal feelings she'd rather keep private. Saturday arrived with perfect late summer weather. Eliza wore her second-best dress, a sage green that her sister had always said brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Mrs. Parker had arranged for her to ride out with the blacksmith and his wife, who were also invited. The Broken Spur Ranch sprawled across a gentle valley, with mountains rising in the distance. The main house was larger than Eliza had expected, a handsome two-story structure of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse completed the picture of a prosperous operation. Victoria greeted guests at the door. Resplendent in a burgundy dress that Eliza suspected had come straight from a New York dressmaker. Isaac stood beside her, looking handsome but uncomfortable in formal attire. Miss O'Sullivan, how delightful you could join us, Victoria said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Thomas has been watching for you. He's in the parlor, showing his friends that telescope I mentioned. The dinner party included about 20 guests, the more prominent families from town, the local doctor and his wife, and the ranch's foreman. Victoria had transformed the dining room with fine linens, silver, and arrangements of wildflowers. She moved through the space with the confidence of someone who already considered herself mistress of the house. Throughout the evening, Eliza noticed how Victoria maneuvered to keep Isaac at her side, touching his arm to emphasize points in conversation, laughing melodically at his occasional dry observations. For his part, Isaac seemed politely responsive, but reserved a stark contrast to the moments of genuine connection Eliza had experienced with him. After dinner, as guests scattered throughout the house and onto the porch, Eliza slipped away to explore. A door off the main hallway opened onto what must have been Rachel's schoolroom. Bookshelves lined one wall, a large desk occupied another, and a blackboard hung opposite the window, which framed a view of distant mountains. She would have liked you. Eliza turned to find Isaac in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. Rachel, he clarified, stepping into the room. She believed education was the greatest gift we could give Thomas. She sounds like a remarkable woman. Isaac nodded, moving to the bookshelf and running his fingers along the spines. She was. Stubborn as the day is long, but kind, always kind. He turned to face Eliza. Thomas has her heart. They stood in silence for a moment. The sounds of the party muffled by the closed door. Your offer? Eliza said finally. About teaching Thomas here. Is it still open? Something flickered in Isaac's eyes. Hope, perhaps. Of course. Has something changed your mind? Before she could answer, the door swung open wider, revealing Victoria. There you are, Isaac. Everyone's asking where you've disappeared to. Her gaze swept from Isaac to Eliza and back, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. I see you're showing Miss O'Sullivan Rachel's little project room. The schoolroom, Isaac corrected mildly. And yes, we were discussing Thomas's education. Victoria slipped her arm through his. Well, you simply must rejoin your guests. It's not proper for the host to vanish. She glanced at Eliza. I'm sure Miss O'Sullivan understands. As Victoria led Isaac away, he glanced back at Eliza with an apologetic expression. Eliza remained in the schoolroom, her emotions in turmoil. The space felt right a place where she could make a difference in Thomas's life, but Victoria's presence complicated everything. Later, as the party was winding down, Thomas found Eliza on the porch, gazing at the stars. Did you see my telescope, Miss Eliza? Aunt Victoria says I can be an astronomer if I want. It's a wonderful gift, Eliza agreed. The stars are particularly bright out here, away from city lights. Thomas leaned against the railing beside her. Are you going to come live here and be my teacher all the time? Pa said he asked you. Eliza hesitated. Would you like that, Thomas? More than anything. His enthusiasm was infectious. Pa said we could fix up the schoolroom real nice and you could have the blue bedroom upstairs. And we could have lessons every day instead of just 3 times a week. That does sound nice, Eliza admitted. Aunt Victoria says I don't need a teacher living here, that she could teach me or Pa could hire someone to come out from town. Thomas's face scrunched in displeasure. But she doesn't understand about the letters getting mixed up. Not like you do. Eliza's heart clenched. Your aunt loves you very much, Thomas. She wants what's best for you. You're what's best for me, he insisted with a child's simple certainty. And for Pa, too. He smiles more when you're around. Before Eliza could respond to this startling observation, Victoria appeared in the doorway. Thomas, it's well past your bedtime. Say goodnight to Miss O'Sullivan. Thomas hugged Eliza impulsively. Please say yes, he whispered before obediently following his aunt inside. The following week brought thunderstorms that turned the roads to mud, making travel between town and the ranch difficult. Thomas missed his Wednesday lesson, and Eliza found herself restless, wondering what was happening at the Broken Spur. On Thursday afternoon, just as the skies were clearing, Isaac appeared at Mrs. Parker's door, his boots caked with mud from the journey. I apologize for arriving unannounced, he said after Mrs. Parker had shown him to the parlor where Eliza was reading. But I needed to speak with you, and I wasn't sure when the roads would be passable again. Eliza set aside her book. Is Thomas all right? He's fine, disappointed about missing his lesson, but fine. Isaac removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I've come about the teaching position at the ranch. I realize you haven't given me an answer yet, but I wanted to assure you that the offer stands, regardless of recent developments. You mean regardless of Miss Blackburn's arrival, Eliza said quietly. Isaac met her gaze directly. Victoria has her own ideas about Thomas's education. She believes he should be sent back east to a boarding school when he's older. And what do you believe? I believe my son thrives under your instruction, Isaac replied without hesitation. I believe he needs consistency and understanding, not being shipped off to strangers who might see his difficulties as deficiencies rather than differences. Eliza nodded slowly. And Miss Blackburn's other ideas? About her role at the ranch? A flush crept up Isaac's neck. Victoria and Rachel were never close. Rachel left New York to get away from her family's expectations. Now Victoria seems determined to honor her sister's memory by stepping into her life. That's not uncommon when someone passes, Eliza observed carefully. Family often feels a responsibility. Perhaps. Isaac's expression hardened slightly. But Rachel would not have wanted Thomas sent away, and she certainly wouldn't have expected me to. He broke off, shaking his head. Forgive me. This isn't appropriate conversation. Isaac, Eliza said gently, if I'm to consider living and working at your ranch, I need to understand the situation fully. Would my presence be welcomed by all members of the household? A wry smile touched his lips. Victoria would adjust. Eventually. Thomas wants you there. And I. He hesitated, then continued more quietly. I find that I'm more at ease in your company than I've been in a long while. The admission hung between them, simple but profound. I'll need a few days to consider, Eliza said finally, and to make arrangements if I accept. Isaac nodded, rising to leave. At the door, he paused. Thomas asked me to give you this. He handed her a folded piece of paper. After he'd gone, Eliza unfolded Thomas's note. In careful, if somewhat uneven handwriting, he'd written, Dear Miss Eliza, please come live at our ranch. Pa needs you. I need you too. Your student, Thomas Dawson. Tears pricked at her eyes as she traced the letters with her fingertip. Thomas had worked so hard on this, every word carefully formed, every letter in its proper place. It was the most complex piece of writing he'd attempted on his own. By Saturday, Eliza had made her decision. She would accept the position at the Broken Spur, despite the complications Victoria's presence might create. Thomas needed her, and if she was honest with herself, she needed them too. The bright-eyed boy and his quiet father had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated when she'd first arrived in Wyoming. She was preparing to send word to Isaac when Mrs. Parker bustled into her room, her expression troubled. There's talk in town, she said, without preamble. Victoria Blackburn has been telling folks she and Isaac are to be married by Christmas. Eliza felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Married? But Isaac never mentioned. Of course he didn't, Mrs. Parker huffed. Men never do. But Miss Blackburn was quite specific at the Ladies' Aid meeting yesterday. Said they'd discussed it years ago after Rachel died, but she wasn't ready to leave New York then. Now she's decided the time is right for Thomas to have a mother again. I see, Eliza said faintly. Thank you for telling me. After Mrs. Parker left, Eliza sank onto her bed, her thoughts in disarray. Had Isaac been leading her on? No, that didn't fit with the honorable man she'd come to know. But perhaps Victoria was right. Perhaps there had been an understanding between them, and Isaac simply hadn't mentioned it because it wasn't relevant to Thomas's education. One thing was certain. She couldn't accept the position at the ranch now. Living under the same roof as Isaac and his fiancée would be unbearable. The next day was Sunday, and Eliza attended church with a heavy heart. She was just leaving the service when she spotted Thomas running toward her, Isaac following at a more measured pace. "Miss Eliza, did you get my letter? Did you decide yet?" Thomas's excitement was palpable. "I did get your letter, Thomas. It was beautifully written," she said, forcing a smile. "But I'm afraid I can't." "Miss O'Sullivan," Isaac interrupted, reaching them. "Could I have a word in private?" Reluctantly, Eliza allowed him to lead her to a quiet spot beneath an old cottonwood tree at the edge of the churchyard. "You look troubled," Isaac observed. "Has something happened?" Eliza met his gaze directly. "I've heard congratulations are in order. On your engagement." Isaac's expression shifted from confusion to dismay. "My what?" "To Miss Blackburn. She informed the Ladies' Aid Society that you'll be married by Christmas." For a moment, Isaac simply stared at her. Then, to her surprise, he laughed a short, incredulous sound. "Victoria said that. Good Lord. It's not true, then?" Eliza hardly dared to hope. "Not in the slightest," Isaac said firmly. "Victoria may have her own plans, but I assure you I am not party to them. There is no engagement, nor will there be." Relief washed over Eliza, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have believed town gossip." "No harm done," Isaac assured her. "But it does explain why half the congregation was looking at me strangely." His expression grew more serious. "Victoria is returning to New York next week. Her visit was always meant to be temporary, despite what she may have implied." "I see," Eliza said, trying to process this new information. "And the boarding school for Thomas?" "Is not happening," Isaac stated firmly. "Which brings me back to my offer. Have you had time to consider it?" Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Eliza found her decision was suddenly clear. "I have, and I would be honored to accept the position as Thomas's teacher at the Broken Spur." The smile that broke across Isaac's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "You've made Thomas a very happy boy, and his father as well." 2 weeks later, Eliza moved into the blue bedroom at the Broken Spur Ranch. Victoria had indeed returned to New York, though not without a parting shot at Eliza. "He'll always love Rachel, you know. No one will ever replace her." Eliza had simply replied, "I would never wish to replace her. Thomas's mother will always be a part of his life, as she should be." The schoolroom was transformed with fresh paint and new curtains. Isaac had built a set of shelves sized perfectly for Thomas's height, and Mrs. Carver, the cook, had sewn cushions for the window seat where Thomas liked to read. Fall turned to winter, and as Isaac had predicted, there were weeks when snow made the journey to town impossible. Eliza found she didn't mind the isolation. The ranch was a world unto itself, with its own rhythms and routines. Thomas thrived under her consistent instruction, making remarkable progress. By Christmas, he was reading simple books on his own and writing short letters to his aunt in New York. Eliza's relationship with Isaac evolved slowly, built on quiet conversations by the fire after Thomas was in bed, shared concern for his son's well-being, and a deepening understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. Isaac spoke more openly about Rachel as the months passed, sharing stories of their early years together and the dreams they'd had for the ranch. In turn, Eliza told him about her father's long illness and her decision to seek a new beginning in the West. One evening in late January, during a particularly fierce blizzard, Eliza was reading in the parlor when Isaac joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thomas is finally asleep," he said, handing her one of the mugs. "He was worried the roof might collapse under all this snow." "Is that a possibility?" Eliza asked, only half joking. Isaac smiled, settling into the chair opposite hers. "Not a chance. I built this house to withstand Wyoming winters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. "I received a letter from the school board in Clearwater today," Isaac said eventually. "Brought in with the last mail delivery before the storm. They're looking for a teacher for the spring term. Their current schoolmaster is moving to California." Eliza's heart sank. "I see. They asked if I knew whether you might be interested in the position." Isaac's expression was carefully neutral. "It would be a proper teaching job, with a regular salary. More than I can offer you here." "And what did you tell them?" Eliza asked, setting down her book. "I said I would pass along the information." Isaac's gaze met hers. "But I also said I hoped you would decline." A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through Eliza's chest. "Did you now?" "Selfishly, yes." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Thomas needs you. The ranch needs you." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "I need you, Eliza." "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it's only been 6 months since you arrived. I know that might seem too soon for what I'm about to say. But out here, life doesn't always allow for the luxury of proper timing." Eliza's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "When Rachel died, I thought that part of my life was over," Isaac continued. "I focused on Thomas and the ranch, and that was enough. Then you arrived with your carpetbag and your determination, and suddenly—" He shook his head, searching for words. Suddenly, there was color again, where everything had been in shades of gray. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, but I want you to know that if you stayed here, it wouldn't have to be as Thomas's teacher. It could be as my wife, if that's something you might consider." Eliza looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers smaller but equally strong in its own way. When she raised her eyes to his, she saw vulnerability there, and hope. "I don't need time to consider, Isaac," she said softly. "My answer is yes." The storm outside seemed to fade away as he moved to kneel before her chair, drawing her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they finally parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Thomas will be ecstatic," he murmured. "He's been dropping hints for months." Eliza laughed softly. "Has he? I hadn't noticed. Just last week he asked why I didn't marry you so you'd never leave." Isaac's smile was tender. "Out of the mouths of babes?" Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it transformed the ranch with explosive greenery and wildflowers. Eliza and Isaac were married in April, in a small ceremony at the Clearwater Church, with Thomas proudly serving as his father's best man. Victoria sent a surprisingly gracious letter of congratulation, along with a silver tea service that had belonged to Rachel's grandmother. "Thomas should have his mother's family heirlooms," she wrote, "and his new mother should have beautiful things with which to make a home." By summer, Eliza had settled fully into her role as Mrs. Dawson. She continued to teach Thomas, but also took on responsibilities around the ranch, learning to manage the household accounts and even helping with the cattle when extra hands were needed during roundup. One evening in late August, almost exactly a year after she'd first arrived in Wyoming, Eliza sat on the porch with Isaac, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Thomas was inside, laboriously writing a letter to his cousin in New York, insisting on doing it without help, to show how much he'd improved. "I have something to tell you," Eliza said, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. He turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised in question. "I visited Dr. Manning when we were in town yesterday." She took his hand, placing it gently over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Isaac. In early spring." Joy blazed across his face as he gathered her into his arms. "Eliza, that's wonderful news. You're happy then? I know we hadn't discussed." He silenced her with a kiss. I'm beyond happy. Thomas will be too. He's been asking for a brother or sister since the wedding. As if summoned by his name, Thomas burst onto the porch, waving his completed letter triumphantly. I finished it, all by myself. Isaac made room for him on the bench between them. Your timing is perfect, son. We have some news to share with you. Later that night, with Thomas finally asleep after an extended discussion about potential baby names, he was firmly in favor of Orion for a boy or Starla for a girl. Eliza and Isaac lay in their bed, talking softly about the future. Did you ever imagine this would be your life? Isaac asked, his hand gently caressing the place where their child grew. When you stepped off that stagecoach last summer? Eliza smiled in the darkness. Never. I came west seeking a teaching position and adventure. I found a family instead. I thank God every day that the school board hired someone else, Isaac murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. And that Thomas dropped your letter that day on the street. As do I, Eliza whispered, thinking of all the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment, the disappointment that had turned to blessing, the chance encounter that had changed everything. As do I. The years that followed brought more blessings than Eliza could have imagined. A daughter named Elizabeth Rachel, born the next April. A son, William Isaac, 2 years later. And the steady growth of the Broken Spur into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Thomas, who had once struggled to read the simplest words, graduated from the University of Wyoming and returned to help manage the ranch, bringing with him new ideas about breeding cattle and land management. His letters home during his college years had been a source of immense pride for both Eliza and Isaac, each one a testament to the difference patient teaching and unwavering support could make. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac surprised Eliza with a small schoolhouse built on the ranch property, where she could teach not only their children, but also those of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. A brass plaque beside the door read, O'Sullivan School, where every mind matters. I remember what you told Thomas that first day, Isaac explained as he showed her the building. That many bright minds perceive letters differently. You've taught all of us to see differently, Eliza, to look beyond the surface to what truly matters. Standing in the doorway of her new school, with her husband's arm around her waist and their children playing in the yard, Eliza thought back to that dusty afternoon when a small boy had picked up her rejection letter from the dirt. Her voice sounds kind, Isaac had said to Thomas that day, not knowing she could hear. Don't let her go. They hadn't let her go. And she, in turn, had held fast to them, creating a life richer and more fulfilling than any she could have planned. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel over the valley, as they had for countless generations before, and would for countless more to come. But here, on this patch of Wyoming soil, the Dawson family had written their own story, one letter, one word, one day at a time.